You're driving through your quiet suburban neighborhood when you see it. A lawn so spectacularly, intentionally hideous that it stops traffic. We're talking knee-high weeds, rusted garden gnomes arranged in what can only be described as a satanic circle, and a giant inflatable flamingo wearing a "Kiss My Grass" banner. Now imagine the HOA president's face when he realized this nightmare lawn was completely legal under their own rules, and that the homeowner who created it, the same guy they'd been harassing for months over grass that was literally half an inch too tall. This is the story of Michael Chen, a software engineer who turned his perfectly manicured suburban lawn into a monument of petty revenge that had his entire HOA questioning everything they thought they knew about property control. And honestly, by the end of this story, you're going to wonder why more people don't fight back like this. Welcome back to HOA Hustle, where we dive deep into the most outrageous homeowners association stories that'll make you grateful you don't live in suburbia. Or maybe give you some ideas if you do. I'm your host, and today we're talking about what happens when an HOA picks the wrong fight with the wrong person. Because Michael Chen wasn't just any homeowner. He was a guy who read contracts for fun, had too much time on his hands, and absolutely zero tolerance for petty authority figures. This story has everything: bureaucratic bullying, legal loopholes, community chaos, and the most legendary act of suburban rebellion you've ever heard of. So buckle up, because this ride gets wild. Let's start in Meadowbrook Estates, one of those picture-perfect suburban developments outside Austin, Texas. You know the type: cookie-cutter houses, sidewalks that look like they're pressure-washed weekly, and yard signs reminding everyone that community standards matter. Michael Chen bought his house there in 2019 thinking he'd found the perfect quiet neighborhood to work from home. The guy was in his early 30s, single, and spent most of his time coding for a tech startup. His idea of weekend fun was optimizing his home network or reading through software documentation. Not exactly the type you'd expect to become a suburban legend. But here's the thing about Michael. He was methodical. When he bought the house, he didn't just skim through the HOA covenants like most people do. He read every single page, all 47 pages of regulations, bylaws, and architectural guidelines. He highlighted sections, made notes, even created a digital spreadsheet organizing all the rules by category. Why? Because Michael had learned the hard way that the devil is always in the details. The Meadowbrook HOA was run by a 5-person board, but really, everyone knew it was Patricia Whitmore's show. Patricia was the HOA president, a retired real estate agent in her 60s who treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. She'd been running the board for 8 years, and her motto was simple: rules exist for a reason, and exceptions create chaos. Patricia was that neighbor. You know the one. She walked her tiny dog twice a day and somehow managed to spot every violation in the process. Trash cans out past pickup day? Citation. Christmas decorations still up in January? Citation. Garden gnome that wasn't in harmony with neighborhood aesthetics? You better believe that's a citation. For the first year, Michael flew under Patricia's radar. He kept his lawn neat, his house painted the approved shade of beige, and his garbage cans stored exactly where they were supposed to be. He was the invisible homeowner, exactly what the HOA wanted. But then came the summer of 2020. Michael had been working from home for months due to the pandemic, and he'd started paying more attention to his yard. He actually began to enjoy gardening. It was a nice break from staring at code all day. He planted some flower beds, installed a small irrigation system, and took real pride in maintaining what everyone agreed was one of the nicest lawns in the neighborhood. That's when Patricia noticed him. It started small, a friendly conversation over the fence about his beautiful roses, compliments on his lawn maintenance. But Michael quickly realized these weren't just neighborly chats. Patricia was assessing him, figuring out what kind of homeowner he was. The first citation came in August 2020. Michael's grass was allegedly 3.2 inches tall when the HOA covenant specified a maximum of 3 inches. The fine? $50. Now, most people would have just paid the fine and moved on. But remember, Michael read contracts for fun. He knew that Section 4.7.3 of the covenant stated that grass height violations required 2 written warnings before any fines could be issued. He'd received 0 warnings. So Michael did what Michael does. He crafted a perfectly polite, legally sound response letter pointing out the violation of due process, attached a printed copy of the relevant covenant sections, and requested the fine be reversed. Patricia's response was swift and telling. Instead of acknowledging the error, she doubled down. She sent back a letter stating that verbal warnings had been given during their previous conversations and that his confrontational attitude was noted in his homeowner file. That's when Michael realized he wasn't dealing with someone interested in following their own rules. He was dealing with someone who used the rules as a weapon. And Michael? Well, Michael started taking pictures. Lots of pictures. What happened next was like watching a slow-motion train wreck, if train wrecks were hilariously petty and involved measuring grass with rulers. Over the next 6 months, Patricia found reasons to cite Michael 14 times. And I'm not talking about legitimate violations here. We're talking about violations so ridiculous that Michael started documenting them just to prove to himself he wasn't going crazy. Violation number 3. His mailbox post was weathered and needed repainting. The post was barely 2 years old and looked fine to everyone except Patricia, who apparently had the eyesight of an art restorer. Violation number 7. He was storing recreational equipment in violation of neighborhood standards. The recreational equipment? A single lawn chair on his back patio that was technically visible from the street if you walked to the very edge of his neighbor's driveway and craned your neck. But the absolute crown jewel of Patricia's citation spree was violation number 11. Michael's shadow was non-compliant. I'm not making this up. Patricia claimed that the tree in Michael's front yard cast a shadow across the sidewalk that created an uneven appearance and was therefore an aesthetic violation. She wanted him to trim the tree to eliminate the shadow. By this point, Michael had paid over $800 in fines and was getting citation letters twice a week. But here's what Patricia didn't realize. Every ridiculous citation was just motivating Michael to dig deeper into those HOA documents. And that's when Michael discovered something beautiful. Remember how I mentioned that Michael had organized all the HOA rules into a spreadsheet? Well, while cross-referencing sections for his shadow citation appeal, he noticed something odd. The landscaping guidelines in Section 6.2 were incredibly specific about what was prohibited, but they were weirdly silent about what was actually required. The rules banned dead or dying vegetation, weeds exceeding 6 inches in height, and anything deemed inconsistent with neighborhood character. But here's what they didn't require. Grass. That's right. Nowhere in the 47 pages of HOA covenants was there any requirement that homeowners actually maintain a grass lawn. The rules assumed everyone would want grass, so they only regulated grass height, grass type, and grass maintenance. But they never actually mandated grass in the first place. Michael spent 3 weeks researching this loophole, cross-referencing every section, checking for amendments, even calling the original developer's attorney to confirm his interpretation. And every legal expert he consulted agreed, as long as he met the specific requirements listed in the covenants, he could legally replace his entire lawn with anything he wanted. This is where most people would have gone for artificial turf or maybe some nice ground cover plants. But Michael? Michael had been dealing with Patricia's harassment for 8 months. He'd paid nearly $1,000 in bogus fines. He'd been accused of being confrontational for following the rules. Michael decided it was time to get creative. But first, he had one more citation to deal with. In January 2021, Patricia hit him with her masterpiece, a $500 fine for persistent landscaping violations and failure to maintain community standards. This fine was supposedly justified by his accumulated violations, but Michael had successfully appealed 6 of his previous citations, was in the process of appealing 4 more, and the remaining 4 were for violations so minor that the total fines should have been $200, not $500. When Michael requested an itemized breakdown of how Patricia calculated $500, her response was literally, The board has discretion to assess appropriate penalties for homeowners who demonstrate a pattern of non-compliance. Translation: we don't like you, so we're making up numbers. That $500 fine was Patricia's biggest mistake, because up until that point, Michael had been trying to work within the system, following proper appeal procedures, being the good homeowner despite the harassment. But $500 for made-up violations? That was war. Michael paid the fine. He wanted to maintain his legal standing while he planned his response. But he also sent Patricia a letter that should have been a warning sign. The letter was polite, professional, and exactly 17 words long. Fine paid under protest. Please be advised that I will be making changes to my landscaping soon. Regards, Michael. Patricia probably thought she'd finally broken him. She had no idea she'd just lit the fuse on the most spectacular HOA rebellion in Texas history. What do you do when you're a software engineer with too much time, too much money, and a legitimate grievance against petty suburban tyrants? If you're Michael Chen, you create what can only be described as the Sistine Chapel of spite lawns. Michael's plan was brilliant in its simplicity. He would replace his grass with landscaping that was technically compliant with every single HOA rule, while being so obnoxiously ugly that the entire neighborhood would revolt against Patricia's tyrannical enforcement. But Michael wasn't just winging this. Remember, this is a guy who reads contracts for fun. He spent 2 months planning his revenge lawn, consulting with lawyers, landscaping experts, and even a few professors of municipal law to make sure every element was bulletproof. The transformation began on a Tuesday morning in March 2021. Michael had taken the entire week off work, and the neighbors started gathering to watch when the first truck arrived. Day 1. Michael's beautiful grass lawn was completely removed and replaced with red lava rock. Not the nice decorative kind you see at upscale shopping centers. We're talking about chunky, industrial-grade lava rock that looked like the surface of Mars. Technically compliant. Absolutely. The covenant said nothing about ground cover materials, only that vegetation had to meet certain standards. Day 2, Michael installed 17 garden gnomes of various sizes arranged in what appeared to be random positions across the lava rock landscape. But they weren't random. Michael had positioned them based on astronomical alignments. Why? Because the HOA rules prohibited temporary decorative displays, but said nothing about permanent astronomical installations for educational purposes. Day 3, the pièce de résistance. Michael planted exactly 127 plants throughout his lava rock lawn. Every single plant was technically a vegetable, which meant they qualified as food production landscaping under a weird exemption that had been added to accommodate someone's herb garden in 2018. But Michael hadn't planted tomatoes or carrots. He'd planted the most visually chaotic, fast-growing, aggressively spreading vegetables he could find. Jerusalem artichokes that would grow 8 feet tall, asparagus that would create dense fern-like thickets, rhubarb with leaves the size of umbrellas. The neighbors didn't know what to think. It was like watching someone build a monument to ugliness with scientific precision. But Michael's masterstroke wasn't the plants or the gnomes or even the lava rock. It was the signs. Michael had installed 11 educational signs throughout his yard, each one providing detailed information about the vegetables he was growing, their nutritional benefits, and their historical significance. The signs were beautifully made, weatherproof, and completely legal under the HOA's educational exemption for historical and agricultural displays. But here's what made them genius. Each sign included a QR code that linked to Michael's new blog, the Meadowbrook Compliance Project, where he documented every single one of his HOA violations, complete with photos, correspondence, and legal analysis. Within 48 hours of completing his spite lawn, Michael's story had spread to every house in Meadowbrook Estates. Neighbors were scanning his QR codes, reading his blog, and for the first time seeing the full extent of Patricia's arbitrary enforcement. And they were pissed. Turns out, Michael wasn't the only one who'd been getting harassed. Patricia had been systematically targeting anyone she perceived as different or difficult. The young couple with the rainbow flag had been cited for non-traditional decorative displays. The elderly man with the slightly faded mailbox had been fined repeatedly for maintenance violations. The single mom with the kids had been written up because her children's sidewalk chalk art was apparently temporary signage without approval. Michael's blog became a confession booth for HOA violations. Neighbors started sharing their own stories, posting pictures of ridiculous citations, and organizing what they started calling the Compliance Review Committee, basically an informal group dedicated to holding Patricia accountable. Patricia, meanwhile, was losing her mind. She showed up at Michael's house on the Thursday after his lawn installation, demanding that he remove this eyesore immediately. Michael was ready for her. He invited her inside, served her coffee, and then walked her through every single element of his landscaping installation, explaining how each component was compliant with specific sections of the HOA covenants. He even provided her with a 23-page compliance report he'd prepared, complete with legal citations and photographic evidence. Patricia's response? "This is ridiculous. You know this isn't what these rules were intended for." And Michael's reply became legendary in the neighborhood. "Patricia, I'm just following the rules. I thought you'd be proud." The next morning, Michael received 3 different citations for various violations related to his new landscaping. Each citation was clearly retaliatory and clearly illegal under the HOA's own enforcement procedures. But this time, Michael wasn't fighting alone. You know how they say revenge is a dish best served cold? Well, Michael Chen served his revenge at absolute zero, and the fallout was spectacular. Within a week of Patricia's retaliatory citations, something unprecedented happened in Meadowbrook Estates. 17 homeowners filed formal complaints against the HOA board, demanding Patricia's removal and a complete audit of enforcement practices. But the real chaos started when Michael's story hit social media. Remember those QR codes on his educational signs? Someone had shared Michael's blog on the neighborhood Facebook page, and from there it spread to HOA horror story groups, local news forums, and eventually Reddit. Michael's story hit the front page of Our Malicious Compliance with over 50,000 upvotes and 3,000 comments in the first day. The attention was intense. Local news crews started showing up, wanting to film Michael's protest lawn. HOA attorneys from across Texas were calling him for interviews. Property law professors were using his case as a teaching example. Michael had accidentally become the poster child for HOA reform. But Patricia was doubling down. Instead of backing off, she started issuing citations to anyone who supported Michael. The neighbor who posted a supportive comment on Facebook got cited for mailbox positioning violations. The family who stopped to read Michael's educational signs got written up for loitering in common areas. Patricia's nuclear option came 3 weeks after Michael's lawn installation. She called an emergency HOA meeting with one item on the agenda: amending the covenants to specifically prohibit Michael's landscaping choices and authorize the board to force compliance at the homeowner's expense. Now, here's where Patricia made her fatal error. HOA covenant changes require a 2/3 majority vote of all home owners, not just the people who show up to meetings. In Meadowbrook Estates, that meant she needed 67 out of 100 households to vote in favor of her emergency amendments. The meeting was standing room only. Patricia had clearly expected to steamroll her changes through with the support of her usual allies and the apathy of everyone else. Instead, she found herself facing a room full of neighbors who had been reading Michael's blog and were not happy about what they'd learned. Michael didn't even speak at the meeting. He didn't need to. One by one, his neighbors stood up and shared their own stories of Patricia's arbitrary enforcement, retaliatory citations, and general abuse of power. The elderly man with the mailbox violations revealed that Patricia had been threatening to sue him for $2,000 in accumulated fines unless he paid for a complete mailbox replacement. The young couple with the rainbow flag had been told their political displays were subject to daily fines until removed. The single mom broke down crying while describing how Patricia had threatened to report her to code enforcement for children playing too loudly in their own backyard. By the time the vote was called, Patricia's amendments weren't just defeated, they were annihilated. Final vote: 8 in favor, 73 opposed, with 19 abstentions. Even some of Patricia's longtime supporters voted against her. But the real bombshell came at the end of the meeting. One of the neighbors, a retired attorney named Bob Martinez, announced that he'd been reviewing the HOA's financial records and had found some concerning irregularities in how fines were being assessed and deposited. Patricia went white as a sheet. Here's what Bob had discovered. Patricia had been inflating fine amounts, backdating violations to increase penalties, and in some cases keeping portions of collected fines instead of depositing them into the HOA account. She'd been running what amounted to a personal ATM machine using HOA violation fees. The room erupted. People were furious. Patricia tried to defend herself, claiming the discrepancies were accounting errors. But Bob had documentation, spreadsheets, bank records, copies of violation notices that didn't match the amounts actually assessed. Within 24 hours of that meeting, Patricia had resigned from the HOA board. Within 48 hours, she'd put her house up for sale. Within a week, the neighborhood was buzzing with rumors that she was facing potential criminal charges for embezzlement. And Michael? Michael was still lovingly tending his spite garden, watching his Jerusalem artichokes grow taller and his rhubarb spread wider, creating an increasingly glorious monument to petty revenge and bureaucratic incompetence. But the story wasn't over yet. 6 months later, Meadowbrook Estates looked like a completely different neighborhood, and not just because of Michael's aggressively ugly lawn. The new HOA board, elected in a landslide vote after Patricia's resignation, implemented what they called the Chen reforms, a complete overhaul of enforcement policies designed to prevent future abuse of power. All violation notices now had to be photo-documented. Fines required approval from at least 3 board members. Homeowners got automatic hearings for any fine over $100. Most importantly, the board established a compliance review committee made up of rotating homeowners who could overturn any citation they deemed unreasonable. Patricia, meanwhile, had fled to Florida. The embezzlement investigation had revealed that she'd stolen nearly $15,000 in HOA funds over 4 years, inflating fines and pocketing the difference. She eventually pled guilty to misdemeanor theft and paid full restitution, but she never returned to Texas. But here's my favorite part of this whole story. Michael's spite lawn became the neighborhood's biggest tourist attraction. Word had spread so far that people were driving from across Austin just to see the legendary compliance garden. Michael started getting visitors every weekend, families posing for photos with the gnomes, gardening enthusiasts asking about his vegetable varieties, even law students studying his case for their HOA litigation classes. The attention got so intense that Michael eventually installed a visitor parking area, properly permitted of course, and started giving guided tours on Saturday mornings. He'd walk people through each section of his garden, explaining the legal strategy behind every plant choice and sharing stories about Patricia's most ridiculous citations. And yes, he was still making money from this. Michael started selling Meadowbrook compliance merchandise, t-shirts with pictures of his garden gnomes, coffee mugs with legal citations, even seed packets with instructions for creating your own spite garden within HOA compliance. But perhaps the most satisfying moment came exactly 1 year after his original lawn installation. The new HOA board presented Michael with a formal apology and a refund check for $1,247, every penny he'd paid in fines, plus interest. Michael's response was classic. He donated the entire amount to a legal aid fund for homeowners fighting HOA abuse, then used the donation ceremony as an opportunity to announce his latest project, a mobile app that helps homeowners analyze their HOA covenants and identify potential violations before they happen. As for the spite lawn itself, Michael kept it for exactly 18 months, long enough to make his point and establish his legend. Then, in a move that surprised everyone, he replaced it with one of the most beautiful, professionally landscaped gardens in the neighborhood. Why the change? Michael's explanation was perfect. I proved my point. Now I want to prove I can be a good neighbor without giving up my rights. The new garden was stunning. Native Texas plants, beautiful stone pathways, educational signs about local ecology. It became a neighborhood showpiece and won 3 different landscaping awards. But Michael kept one element from his original spite lawn, a single garden gnome, positioned prominently near his front door, with a small plaque that read, "In memory of common sense." Today, Michael still lives in Meadowbrook Estates. He's actually on the HOA board now, serving as the compliance officer, a position he helped create to ensure fair and transparent enforcement of neighborhood rules. His house has become the example other neighborhoods point to when they want to reform their own HOA problems. And that blog? The Meadowbrook Compliance Project is still active, with over 100,000 regular readers who share their own HOA horror stories and get advice on fighting back legally and effectively. So what's the moral of Michael Chen's story? Maybe it's that knowledge is power. Michael won because he actually read the rules everyone else ignored. Maybe it's that bullies only win when people don't fight back. Patricia's reign of terror ended the moment neighbors started supporting each other. Or maybe it's just that sometimes the best way to fight absurdity is with even more spectacular absurdity. But here's what I think is the real lesson. Michael didn't just fight for himself. He could have paid his fines, kept his head down, and lived with Patricia's harassment like everyone else. Instead, he turned his personal grievance into a community awakening that changed the entire neighborhood for the better. That spite lawn wasn't just revenge, it was activism. It was a middle finger to petty authoritarians everywhere, wrapped in perfect legal compliance and served with a side of educational vegetables. Now I want to hear from you. What would you have done in Michael's situation? Have you ever dealt with an HOA that thought it was running a dictatorship instead of a neighborhood? And more importantly, what's the most creative act of petty revenge you've ever witnessed? Drop your stories in the comments below. If you enjoyed this deep dive into suburban warfare, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA horror stories, neighborhood drama, and tales of residents who refuse to back down when faced with bureaucratic bullying. And hey, if you're currently dealing with your own HOA nightmare, maybe Michael's story will inspire you to read those covenants a little more carefully. You never know what loopholes you might find. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight, and remember, sometimes the best compliance is malicious compliance. Peace out, and thanks for watching HOA Hustle.